This is a carton of orange juice. It has a label, a barcode, a list of ingredients on the side, suspiciously which not all of it is just oranges. It has a plastic lid. It has a nice picture of an orange on the front. It's blue. This is a carton of orange juice. But is it? Princess Alex, Northampton. I was sat in the garden having a conversation with a friend about politics. It was one of those conversations that had gone on for way too long. Or, in a more accurate measurement of time, around 6 pints. We found ourselves meandering towards the easy topic of race. And whilst the exact content of the conversation is somewhat irrelevant and lost forever to Carlsberg, the one thing that is of relevance is that at a certain point, this friend of mine found it perfectly acceptable to call me a chalk ice. Because I had a viewpoint that didn't agree with his. A chalk ice, a race traitor, because of my opinion and because of my appearance. A fucking chalk ice. And for those of you that don't understand what it means brown on the outside and white in the middle. It's a very ugly thing to call somebody. And secondly, and this is what really got me, was how much it bothered me. A single naming, a single word, had the power and the weight to bring so much to the surface. I was taken backwards to my childhood. The bullying, the fear, the shame, the isolation, the violence, and the hate, because of the color of my skin. It was just a small comment, but I thought about it for months. And the more that I thought about it, the more confused I became. Maybe there were parts of me that I had ignored for a long time, hidden. I was a very confused 35-year-old man. And then, in the same week, I received an email from a friend. I don't think, in all the time that I've known you, we've ever talked about race. Maybe that's a problem, maybe that's a good thing, not sure. But yeah, I guess what I'm trying to say in a very roundabout way is I know your skin is a different color to mine. And it makes no sense to me that this would ever be an issue. But watching the news recently, apparently it still very much is for some people. And I'm sorry that's happening, and I want to share a lot of love to those who have had to deal with that firsthand. I wanted to say something because ignoring it and treating race like the elephant in the room seems so fucking cowardly at the moment. I just want to tell you all I fucking love you, and I'm sorry that this is happening at all. I don't think I've ever seen you as any different to me or any of our friends. Well, neither had I. But two friends, in quick succession, who are both still very dear to me, by the way, commenting on and questioning my heritage and my racial identity, had got me thinking about it for the first time in a very, very long time. Maybe I want to be different, and maybe I don't. I was still very confused. Once there was a very confused brown-skinned boy who lived in Wales, in a town called Lampeter, on a council estate called Maes y Derry, which is Welsh for the oak field. A name given because of the giant oak tree that grew at the bottom of his road that he loved to climb. One day, the brown-skinned boy was outside playing, alone and aloud for the first time, and he absolutely loved it. The sense of freedom, the sense of independence, running his hand along the cold steel rail outside the front of his house gave him the feeling that if he got to the end, he would take off and he would float away over the hills and over the trees. But he was very confused. It was summer, and summer in the Welsh countryside was intensely beautiful. The brown-skinned boy got home to his family, his brother, 2 sisters, and his mum. And as they poured him a nice glass of orange juice, he had a very important question for them. "Mum, where am I from?" "What do you mean, where are you from?" "Well, there was a man outside. He told me to fuck off back to where I come from." You see, the source of his confusion was that he had never even considered that there was another place to be from than a small town called Lampeter on a council estate called Maes y Derry. Because in his mind, the only place you are from is the place where you are. So, his mother responded to him in that way that mothers do when they are helping a child to understand something. She spoke calmly, hiding her own anger. And the words that she said, they more than just stuck with him. They floated from her mouth, they landed in his mind, and they slept. "You are from here. You were born here. This is your home, and you have just as much a right to it as anybody else." He was just 5 years old. This is a carton of orange juice. But is it? So, the layout of the Tetra Pak was created by a graphic designer. The barcode was invented by Norman Joseph Woodfield. The list of ingredients and the nutritional content, scientists, mathematicians. The plastic on the lid, the plastic on the inside, made from oil, which doesn't drill itself. The field, the farmer, the tree, the truck, the tools, the squashing, the squeezing, the pouring, millions of gallons shipped over the sea. The driver at port. The delivery to the shop. The person waiting in the shop, day after day, hour after hour, again, again, and again, and again. And this is just a carton of orange juice. Near a field of orange trees in South Africa in the 50s, a young girl named Monica was getting excited because her grandfather was taking her on a trip for the weekend. One of the things that she loved to do the most was go to visit her cousins that lived in Durban, only a short train ride from where she lived. She would go along with her 8 siblings, and she was the youngest. Her grandfather came to collect them in the morning to take them. He opened the door, she ran out and gave him a big hug. He hugged her back, palmed a penny from behind her ear, and said, "This is for you to spend on some sweets for the journey." So, they set off walking down a path through the bush to where the train station was. The path cut through some beautiful country, and it was littered with fruit trees, plants, wildflowers, and thick, thick grass. As they were walking, Monica saw something slithering through the grass. She said, "Tata," which means grandfather. "There is something in the grass. It's a snake. I can see it." He carefully scooped her up, held her tight, and calmly told her, "Ignore the danger. If you don't confront it, it won't bite you. Don't be afraid. It will most likely slither off eventually if you wait for long enough." So, they got back to the train, and then, with his 8 grandchildren in tow, he got them in the carriage, laughing, joking, tweaking noses and kissing foreheads. There was a sign on the carriage that said, "Coloureds only." Incidentally, coloured is what they call you in South Africa when you're mixed race. So Tata, after entering the train, carried on the luggage and said to his grandchildren, "Right, children, I have some very important business to attend to. I'm going to go and speak to the driver, but you wait here and I'll be back at the end of the journey." He nodded to the eldest of the group because the eldest understood what this meant. You see, Tata was a white man, and it was illegal for him to sit in the same carriage as his coloured grandchildren.
In South Africa in the 60s, for fraternization between races and breaking the rules of apartheid, there were 4 common punishments: a fine, whipping, imprisonment, or death by hanging. A fine, whipping, imprisonment, or death by hanging.
Monica was now a young woman and the treasurer for the local church, and it was her job to walk to the bank every week and make a deposit. She was young, strong-willed, and very, very beautiful. And like most young women her age, in the 60s, was looking for the kind of romance that you saw in the movies. A life-changing, sweeping romance that maybe you could write a story about one day. So one week she went to the bank, got in the queue, and at the counter there was a very handsome, tall, young white man called Ian, who greeted Monica and complimented her on the necklace she was wearing, which was a cross. You see, Monica came from a Catholic family. She said, "Thank you." They had a little chat, and Monica told him that she was the new treasurer and would be back next week. Ian, with a cheeky smile, said, "I look forward to it." So the weeks went by, and the weekly visits continued, until one day, out of the blue, Ian asked, "Is there a midweek service at your church?" "Yes," she said, surprised. "I didn't realize you were Catholic." "Yes," he lied. "In fact, I went to a Catholic school." "What time is Mass?" 6 p.m. every Wednesday. Ian was not a Christian, but apparently he had a great deal of faith. So Ian started to go to church every week. And at the end of the service, which was racially segregated, he would wait outside and in front of everybody talk to Monica and her family, ignoring race and color and segregation, much to the concern of many members of the parish. Then eventually, and on the pretense of conducting important bank-related business, Ian would visit Monica at her family home.
A fine, whipping, imprisonment, death. A distant memory, a snake in the grass, a danger to be avoided.
So perhaps it was a case of forbidden fruit. Perhaps it was a small rebellion against oppression. Perhaps it was just two young people that fell in love, the way that young people do in the movies. But whatever the reason, that romance that Monica was looking for, she had found in Ian. Ian would take the bus, a 2-hour journey, to visit Monica every weekend in secret. They would sit in her room listening to the Beatles, Bob Dylan, and Elvis. Ian was intelligent, passionate about history, literature, art, philosophy. They would talk endlessly about these subjects. He was full of stories, and Monica loved to listen to him speak. There is something so beautiful that in a time of oppression, racial segregation, and hatred, there were two young people finding romance, being normal, listening to music. This secret romance went on for over a year.
I think. Yeah, 68, then 1 year, 69. Carton was born 70. So I came at the end of 67, I think.
In the winter of 1968, in the city of Canterbury, Monica was walking the streets in the rain. She was cold, homesick, and hungry. With little or no money and little or nothing to do that day, she explored the centre, moving forward, if only to keep the cold from her bones. Eventually, turning a corner, she found herself stunned by one of the most beautiful things she had ever seen. The majesty of the architecture of Canterbury Cathedral. Its twin spires framing stained glass windows, giving it the look of a castle from a story, more than something that really existed. The sight stopped her in her tracks. She gazed at its beauty and wondered at its history. She had never seen anything like it. There was nothing like it in South Africa. You see, South Africa was a new country. So to this young woman who had seen little past her hometown, it was huge, imposing, and intensely beautiful. She felt that special feeling of wonderment and smallness that large buildings are designed to create. So this young woman now stood in the middle of her first winter, no nice boots, no winter coat, hungry, but also filled with the kind of happiness and warmth that only one thing can give you. Monica was in love and was soon to be married to Ian. She was free, having left the oppression, division, hate, and racism that was the institution of the government of her home country. This first winter would be hard, but she will remember those days as some of the happiest of her life. The day before the wedding came, and the bride and her fiancé had a choice to make. But it wasn't a choice of the colour of flowers, the style of the bridesmaid's dress, or the flower girl's hair. It was the choice of what to do with the last of the food that they had. A single packet of hydrated pea soup, with no money to buy more after. Would they eat this small meal on the evening before or on the morning of their wedding day? That was the choice. Times were hard. The 60s were different. It wasn't all swinging. Some people were just poor. The bride proudly declared, "There is no way I'll be married on an empty stomach. I will not be a starving bride. We will save it for the morning." Ian quite possibly stayed quiet. Monica was somewhat fierce. So they both went to bed hungry. In the morning, they woke up, got dressed and prepared breakfast, bread and soup for two. And although it was simple food, it was in that special way that only the truly hungry are capable of understanding, delicious, warm, and savoury. They were due to be married in the Church of St. Thomas, with no guests, no reception, and no plans for a honeymoon. The priest, feeling bad for the couple, asked if they would like to join him after the service for a glass of sherry to toast the bride. Like all good Catholic priests, he had a well-stocked stash of sherry. The promise of this small treat had the couple excited. Things were looking up. As there were no guests, some of the ladies of the parish group were in attendance to witness, and one of their daughters was standing in as the flower girl. She handed the young South African bride a bouquet, smiling sweetly as she did so. At this small act of kindness, the bride must have felt that this day, despite everything, would be a happy one, and that the future would be brighter than the past. At the end of the service, the newlyweds were led round to the side of the church, where the hall and the stash of sherry was kept. There was an air of excitement at this point amongst the ladies. They opened the doors. She walked into the hall and noticed that it had been decorated with red ribbons, trestles, and flowers. And on a long table at the front of the room, there was the most amazing, delicious spread of food she had ever seen. And in the middle of the table, there was a wedding cake. And not only was there sherry, but there was champagne and, of course, orange juice. Monica's first thought was, who is all this for? My mum, Monica, loves wedding cake to this day. And I'm certain that whenever I see her eat it, I can see the smile of that young woman she was. She travels back to that room with her new friends and husband, enjoying friendship and food in that special way that only people who are hungry and homesick really know. The ladies of that group, all strangers, people that she was meeting for the first time, heard of her situation and took it upon themselves to organise and pay for her wedding reception in secret. And my mum will never forget them as long as she lives. Small kindnesses, every day, all over the world, become stories that shape us, that change lives. The Starving Bride, a story of kindness, compassion, a story of love. When I heard it as a young boy, it was like something from the past reached out to me. The kindness of these women, who I will never see, never know, and never be able to thank, coming through my mother's voice, reaching forward from the past and teaching me, a young boy, the incredible value of being kind. The daughter of one of the ladies, a small, beautiful thing in a white dress, sat next to my mum in the church, would not leave her side, and held her hand, unaware of colour and segregation. It doesn't always matter where you come from, because this is a carton of orange juice.
Because this is a carton of orange juice. Hello, my name is Chris Lowe, and I was born in Aberystwyth, Wales, to Monica Lowe, a brown South African immigrant with some Scottish ancestry, and Ian Lowe, a half Scottish, half Afrikaans immigrant with a bit of Cape coloured thrown in there just to confuse things a bit more. Like my heritage, I'm somewhat mixed up. This show is partly an answer to the question, where do you come from? And a response to the statement, why don't you fuck off back to where you come from? And that the idea that this is a valid question or statement highlights that the questioner is on every level missing the point. We are all so profoundly connected. In big ways, like we're all made of stars, but also in small ways, like friendship, family, sharing food, and sharing drink. Because this is a carton of orange juice. Thank you.